Welcome back to Elam.life. My name is Ephraim. I'm glad that you're joining us today. We've had our Starlink a little over 2 months now, and I have a pretty good idea of its operations in this area and as we travel around the U.S. So I want to share what I've discovered with you and let you make the decision whether Starlink is right for you or not. So now we've got the configuration out of the way, let's talk about how Dishy has performed for us over the past 2 months. The first month we had it, I didn't have time to complete the install, so we used it in the configuration that they intended, which is Dishy, Starlink router, and an Ethernet adapter, and the whole system set up in bypass mode. And that was certainly adequate. However, the Starlink router is a 110 volt only. If you're going to do anything boondocking wise, that means you must be running your inverter, which is a serious power draw. And so that was not satisfactory for me. So for the second month, we actually finished the install. We did away with the Starlink router and their Ethernet adapter. Dishy is in pass-through mode, feeding directly into our router through our PoE injector. The first thing I want to point out is that since we've owned Starlink, it has never reached its promised performance, ever. So the performance was promised as 150 to 250 megabits download. I think maybe once or twice we were over 100 megabits, but most of the time we're way below that. The reasoning for that is probably because the southwest of the United States has so much open area and so little high-speed options that Starlink is oversold in this area for the number of satellites that they have in place. Initially, when we received it, Starlink was able to achieve a speed of about 50 megabits per second. However, as soon as everybody around us started receiving their Starlinks, the performance just went to pieces. And during prime time, as you can see, 2 megabits, 4 megabits, maybe 5 megabits. And that's not just for a short period of time, that's for an extended period of time running from about 3 p.m. to well after midnight. That's really unacceptable performance for any kind of high-speed internet. Starlink speeds overall have plummeted at a steady rate, and now it's just barely usable during prime time in this location. Now, we do have portability so that we can actually travel with it. That's an additional $25 a month, making your monthly bill $135. But I'm noticing as we travel through the Southwest United States that many, if not most places, are suffering from the same kind of problems. During off-peak hours, which are typically going to be in the mornings, except for roughly 8 to 10, and then in the afternoons until about 3 o'clock, you're going to see speeds that range somewhere between 40 to 70, maybe as high as 100, but probably not. But just as soon as you get into the prime time where everybody wants to just relax and stream a Netflix video or something like that, the speeds plummet and it's almost unusable. So you have to make the determination, how much speed do you need? If you need it during those prime time usage hours and you need more than 2 megabits per second or 5 megabits per second, it's probably not going to work for you. If you're choking over the $600 buy-in price on it and the $135 monthly cost if you're using it for portability, and all you're getting is 2 megabits, 4 megabits, 6 megabits, it's probably not worth the money for you. At least not until Starlink builds out their satellite network further. But I'm not sure I completely buy into that. I am a wireless internet service provider. That's my main job. And I see how people treat the system. One of the issues is that Starlink does not have a data cap. And people see that as unlimited. Now, I'm going to speak to you as a wireless internet service provider here. Unlimited to the average consumer does not mean what unlimited means to internet service providers. And every service provider in existence eventually learns this lesson, because people can be brutal to the data throughput of your system. If you tell them unlimited, which everybody does because it's marketing hype, the consumer hears as much as I want, whenever I want, at the full rated speed. In the ISP world, that's what's called a dedicated system. What they mean when they say unlimited is we're not going to cut you off as long as you pay the bill, but we may manage your speeds. So during prime time, it's going to slow down automatically, but if you're a high user and you're just paying the same amount as everybody else, we may throttle your speed back after a certain amount. And if you have a cell phone that you've purchased unlimited data on, you're familiar how that works. So eventually, Starlink is going to have to change things. They're either going to have to put a lot more satellites in space, or they're going to have to implement some sort of data management scheme where high-end users either pay more for their data or they get throttled back, allowing everybody else to actually use the system. I don't see the current model as sustainable because people are basically going to walk away from it. You're just not going to pay $135 a month for 2 megabits per second. Now, if you're using Starlink as your residential option, of course your monthly is only going to be $110 at that point. If you have nothing else, it's probably okay. But I'm going to put it in the same class as HughesNet or Exceed, I think is the name of the what used to be Wild Blue. It's just not good enough, especially for the price that they're offering, because there are typically other things out there that are less expensive and have equal or greater performance. If you live in an area that's not oversold, by all means, it's awesome. I'm not sure how many places are not oversold at this point. I do know that I have friends who consistently get 200 megabits per second, whatever time of day they're using it. And for them, it's probably worth it. But for me, I have access to dedicated fiber, and I can get a 1 gigabit per second fiber line, and Starlink can't even come close to that sort of performance. So my primary function is for traveling. Now, if you're traveling and you're always traveling within a cellular area footprint, you're probably going to get adequate performance from your cellular at less price or less cost than what the Starlink is. And if that's the case, it's probably not for you. But if you travel in areas where cellular doesn't really have a good footprint, or the cellular that's available doesn't have good throughput, you might consider it. I'm going to keep it because it does open up areas that have no cellular footprint, no campground Wi-Fi, and no other options. We are able to actually boondock, and I can still manage my business. For us, I'm going to keep Starlink, simply for the fact that it allows us to travel to places that were previously off limits, because I must maintain contact with my business. Let's sum it up really quickly. Is Starlink right for you? You have to make that decision. Starlink cannot deliver on what it's promising in most areas today. Before you spend the money on Starlink, find someone in your area who has Starlink and see what their performance is during the times that you need to use it. That's your best option. If you do not have someone in your area that already has Starlink that you can talk to, you can purchase Starlink, and they do have a 30-day money-back guarantee. You must return the hardware to them within the 30 days if it's not good enough for you. Note that the 30 days does not start when you get Starlink. It starts 14 days after they ship Starlink. So you might have a little bit more than 30 days. You might have a little bit less depending on how long it took shipping to get the system to you. But check it out quickly, because you'll know whether it'll work for you or not. The system is probably going to continue its downward trend simply because Starlink is not going to stop putting customers on the system. And they have too many customers on the system right now. So they're either going to have to increase the speed at which they build it out, or decrease the speed at which they take on new customers, or put some sort of limits on existing customers in order for Starlink to be completely usable for everybody who's on the system. That's all I had for you today. So we'll see you next week, and you guys have a great week.